Hi, my name is Cornelius Cappelen, and I'm happy to present the results from work package 6, called the impact of the GRC and GMC on the citizens' recognition of the right to international protection. I'm working on this project work package together with Hakan and Pierre. So the research we do in this part of PROTECT is quantitative and basically consists of designing and fielding a comprehensive survey about people's attitudes toward immigration and refugee issues in 26 countries. In this presentation, I will briefly report on the progress that we have done up till now. So we have A, designed a survey already. B, that survey has already been fielded. And C, literally some days ago, we received the results. So we have not yet had time to do any thorough analysis, but at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a couple of interesting results, at least results that we think are interesting. New slide. So the overall objective of work package 6. So work package 6 examines the factors that affect citizens' attitudes to the right to international protection in the context of the global compact implementation processes. For this purpose, the multi-nation comparative survey was planned and has now been carried out. And as I already alluded to, our work consists of 3 phases. First, designing the survey, which we have done. I'll say a little bit more about that in the next slide. The content of the survey. And 2, fielding the survey, including choosing a survey provider. I'll say a little bit more about that in 2 slides. And 3, analyzing and data and writing reports and articles. This, of course, is the most pleasurable part of the work, which we are just starting doing, and that awaits us. New slide. So a little bit more content about the content of the questions involved in the survey. So UIB is short for University of Bergen. So both me, Pierre, and Hakan are working on this project. We all work at the University of Bergen and the Department of Comparative Politics. So UIB has designed a questionnaire that comprises 3 components. The first one collects data about the demographic traits of the respondents, so-called observables. So this would be kind of age, gender, geography, income, etc., etc. And the second component collects data about the respondents' position within the global cleavage system, their preferred notion of citizenship, and their attitudes to the right to international protection. This is kind of the largest component, of course, of the survey. And I'll just say a little bit more about it. It involves measuring preferences related to the power structure between different levels of governance. It also involves measuring the strength of numerous types of nativist sentiments, both political and civic. So, for example, should citizens in a given country have the same citizen rights as natives? It also involves measuring preferences for different types of refugee protection policies. And lastly, I would say it involves questions about how to treat admitted refugees relative to natives. So that would, for example, be, should we give them the access to the same education system, competence building, etc., etc. So those are a little bit more what this second component involves. And the third and last component comprises survey experiments measuring attitudes toward responsibility sharing. So then the overall kind of objective of this part of the project is to empirically investigate public attitudes toward burden and responsibility sharing across countries. And its responsibility sharing component, of course, is very important in the global compacts. And we don't only do survey experiment on that, we also have regular questions about responsibility sharing, which we think is very important. I want to say that I think we have 20 or 22 questions plus questions about demographic background variables, but a lot of these questions have background, they are kind of battery questions, which means that I think that we have all in 80 specific survey items or questions. And it took me, when I took it, we don't really know the average time it took them to do the survey yet. I did it relatively, I don't know, slow or fast, but it took me around 18 minutes. So it's a relatively long survey, and it will give us a lot of information, we hope. New slide. So after designing the survey, we issued a formal call for tenders to select a survey firm that will conduct the survey at the best value for money. So we had it actually took a lot of time to choose a survey provider. We had a competition, I think 5 or 6 competitors. We actually ended up choosing a Norwegian firm called Faktum Markedsanalyse. And we had different criteria for choosing. One was price, of course. The second was quality of deliverance. And the most important criteria was the sampling procedure of the country panels. So how are the panel participants recruited? And I think equally important, the method of recruiting response from the sample to the actual survey, from the panel to the actual survey. And I think the Faktum Markedsanalyse, which we chose, scored very high on all of these parameters. And we have actually had a very, very good relationship with them. And we are happy with the work they've done. New slide, we are happy to report that we actually were able to include 26 countries in the survey, which is a lot, I would say. Italy, France, Spain, Greece, Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Austria, UK, Germany, Sweden, Denmark, Canada, South Africa, etc., also USA. I'm not going to go through all of these names, they're on the slide. There's a minimum of 1,000 respondents in each of these countries. They are representative and observable characteristics such as age, gender, income, geography, etc., etc. We are actually happy with the quality of the survey in the sense that we are happy with the representativity of the samples for each country. So we think basically that the survey has what we would call high quality. New slide. So in this last or latter part of the presentation, I'll give you two quick findings that we already have. So as I already said, we basically literally received the data and the findings some days ago. So we really haven't done any analysis yet, but we've done two quick analysis. I'll present to you two findings that we find interesting. So before I'll give you the first of these findings, I'll just give you some background to it. So the European Union's new Pact on Migration and Asylum, the so-called new Pact, proposes, as we speak, measures to make member states' contribution to European solidarity then towards refugee protection, mandatory. So the new pact addresses all the four main GCR objectives. So GCR is then the United Nations Global Compact for Refugees, such as reducing pressure on receiving countries and expanding refugees' access to third country solutions. But interestingly, clearly beyond the GCR frame, the new pact requires EU member states to contribute to responsibility sharing either by accepting reallocations into their territory or by paying and organizing rejected asylum seekers returns and readmissions. So either you can accept reallocation or you can kind of pay your way out of it. And this is what we try to measure people's attitudes or sentiments towards this type of responsibility sharing, where you can actually pay your way out of it. So what's on the slide is what this particular question looked for the respondents in the UK. So I'll just read the question and I'll give you some preliminary findings afterwards. So quotation. Many countries are handling a disproportionate number of asylum applicants by comparison to the overall number of asylum claims. It could therefore be considered fair that some of the applicants in these countries are relocated to other countries with fewer applicants. It seems that the UK has relocated 100 new applicants because it handles fewer cases compared to many other countries. However, the UK is given the option of paying a financial solidarity contribution rather than accepting the new applicants. And every survey respondents, close to 30,000 of them in all the countries, received that question. But then the respondents were randomly assigned to one of these three groups. That is what makes this into an experiment. So the first group of respondents, randomly assigned to the following, to group one, received the question: if you could decide which of the following two options would you choose? A, accept all the applicants, or B, pay a financial solidarity contribution of 5,000 euros for each applicant to the state that accepts them. Now, the second group of respondents received the following question: if you could decide which of the following two options would you choose? Accept the applicants, or B, pay a financial solidarity contribution of 50,000 euros for each applicant to the state that accepts them. And in the third group, the sum you had to pay was 250,000 euros. So clearly what we wanted to examine or study with this experiment was to what extent the kind of like size of the solidarity contribution, to what extent that the size of it affected people's willingness to actually accept or pay a financial solidarity contribution, to what extent it affects your willingness, so to speak, to kind of like pay away out of it. New slide. This is the kind of overall finding of this experiment. So you see that when the solidarity contribution is only 5,000 euros, which is frankly speaking not that much. 44.6% would pay the solidarity contribution, but that means only when also when the sum is only 5,000 euros, a clear majority do not want to pay. They are willing to take in the applicant. I find that amazing. I thought the number would be much lower. And you see clear treatment effects, right? So when the sum, so the willingness to pay decreases substantially with the sum. So when the sum is 250,000 euro to pay, only 31.9% of the respondents, this is all respondents taken together, are willing to pay, which means that close to 70% would rather take in the applicant. So another way to say this is that independent of the size of the solidarity contribution, a majority of the respondents in these 26 countries would rather accept the applicants instead of paying the solidarity contribution, which we think is a very interesting finding. New slide. So this is treatment effect by country. So treatment effect we define as the percentage point reduction in share willing to pay rather than accept applicants when the price goes from 5,000 euros to 250,000 euros. So you see there is enormous heterogeneity here, like large differences. So you see for some countries, particularly kind of like some rich countries like Germany, Denmark, Belgium, Sweden, the kind of like reduction in willingness to pay is rather small. It doesn't really matter if the price to pay is high or low. Well, for some countries, it matters a lot. If you take Slovenia and Slovakia, Estonia, South Africa, there's an enormous drop in the willingness to pay. So price to pay matters a lot for some countries and less for other countries. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The one obvious reason is GDP per capita, how rich the country is. If you look at the countries down at the y-axis, they're relatively rich, most of them at least, right? And if you look at the top of the y-axis, where the differences are highest, when they're poorer, right? So GDP per capita has something to do with it, but there's a lot of other explanations that that we haven't really analyzed yet, but that we of course will look into. New slide. This is just a two-country comparison between my country, Norway, and Slovenia. And Norway is kind of like a average country when it comes to the treatment effect. So in Norway, when the solidarity contribution is 5,000 euros, 48.5% choose to pay, while when it is 250,000 euros, 37.6% of the population of the respondents want to pay. It's not an enormous treatment effect. It's not that high, right? The difference is around 10%. But you see the difference is much higher in Slovenia. So then when the solidarity contribution is 5,000 euros, 54.3% would choose to pay rather than accept. And when it's 250,000 euros, it goes down to 27.8% that would rather choose to pay than accept. So they are much more price sensitive than Norway. And of course, again, GDP per capita might be one reason for why the treatment effect is higher in Slovenia than in Norway. Okay, so new slide. I'll present one more finding that we find particularly interesting. So brief background before I read or present the question and give you the findings. Public administrators in a lot of policy kind of context can make one of two mistakes due to lack of relevant information. So they can reward the kind of like undeserving, that would be a false positive, and they can fail to reward somebody that is deserving, that would be a false negative. So to illustrate in the context of welfare policy, so a public administrator can give benefits, social benefits, to somebody that is really not worthy of benefits, that doesn't really satisfy the criteria for receiving benefit, that would be a false positive. And the administrator can also fail to give benefits to somebody that really satisfies the criteria for receiving benefits, that would be a false negative. Take the justice system, for example. You could in the justice system, you could find the innocent guilty, that would be a false positive, but you could also let the guilty go free, that would be a false negative. And we know that these mistakes, false positives or false negatives, or type 1 or type 2 errors, that they're also called, we think that those or the kind of people's attitudes towards those mistakes have a profound impact on their preferences, important preferences. So to what extent you think a false positive is worse than a false negative, or vice versa, can have a profound impact on people's relevant preferences. And we asked about false positives and false negatives in an asylum context. So I'm going to read the question for you now and give you the findings later. So quotation, this is how the question was presented to the respondents. To be granted asylum, the asylum seeker must meet the conditions for being recognized as a refugee. He or she must have a well-founded fear of being prosecuted because of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a social group. Suppose you agree with a set of such conditions in your country and that you think that they are appropriately strict. Due to a lack of relevant information, it can sometimes be difficult for the authorities to know with certainty whether an asylum seeker actually meets the conditions for being granted asylum. This can lead to two types of mistake. A, that an asylum seeker who meets the condition is not granted asylum. B, that an asylum seeker who does not meet the conditions is granted asylum. So the first is a false negative, and the latter one is a false positive. New slide. So after reading this short vignette, the respondents got the following answer options. Which of the two mistakes do you find most serious, do you most want to avoid? A, it is clearly the most serious that an asylum seeker who meets the condition is not granted asylum. B, it is somewhat more serious that an asylum seeker who meets the condition is not granted asylum. Both errors are equally serious. D, it is somewhat more serious that an asylum seeker who does not meet the condition is granted asylum. E, it is clearly the most serious that an asylum seeker who does not meet the conditions is granted asylum. So basically what we're asking about here is to what mistake those respondents think is worst, making a false positive or making a false negative. So new slide and first brief finding. So the x-axis here measures responses for all the respondents, close to 30,000 respondents, to the previous question about like what mistakes they think is worse, false positive or false negative. So the more right, the higher value you have on the respondent has on the x-axis, the more serious the respondent think it is to grant asylum to an asylum seeker who actually does not meet the conditions. That is a false positive, relative to the non-asylum seeker who actually satisfy the conditions, granting that person asylum, a false negative. Now the y-axis measures responses to the following question. All countries should collaborate and strive by all means to protect the world's refugees. You think this is a typical proxy question for kind of like how strict a person is in relation to immigration issues. So the higher a value on the y-axis, the more respondent agree to this question that all countries should collaborate and strive by all means to protect the world's refugees. And you see a very, very strong correlation here, actually. If you really believe that false negatives is the worst of the two mistakes, you're relatively in agreement with the statement that all countries should collaborate and strive by all means to protect the world's refugees. But the more you start believing that false positives is worse, the less you agree with that statement, the more strict you become in refugee and asylum issues, if you think that this is really a proxy for that. And it's a quite interesting finding, and this is what we expect, actually. It's a very strong and negative correlation, which we find very, very interesting. New slides. This is the exact same analysis, but at the country context level. So you see from this figure that the more a country on average, so the average citizen, the average response, so to speak, believe that false positive is worse, the less they agree with the statement that all countries should collaborate and strive by all means to protect the world's refugees. And opposite, the more a country on average believe that false negatives are worse, the more they agree with the statement that all countries should collaborate and strive by all means to protect the world's refugees. So actually, the correlation here is even stronger than at the individual level. And when we applaud the result in the sense that it's exactly what we believe it to be, and we theorized. I'm not going to go through the theory here, but we find it very, very interesting for sure. New slide. So, well, this was just like two brief preliminary analysis. We haven't had really time to dig into this, but I mean, we're really looking forward, both me and Hakan and Pierre, to kind of start working on this. Now the real work starts, right? We're going to do the analysis, we're going to write reports and the articles, the essays, and we're really looking forward to do that. We're going to do that this semester and the next semester. Yeah, see you at the seminar, and thank you and best wishes from Cornelius, Hakan, and Pierre.